Okay. We decided to place this protest, which took place in Richmond in the 1970s. It was on behalf of the Equal Rights Amendment. ERA, here we are right here, because it draws people immediately into the exhibit. It's full of passion. It's relatively contemporary. It also helps give you a kind of long perspective on the women's civil rights movement, from the suffragettes who are featured over here, the early 19th century, into the late 19th century, and American women dealing with persistent gender discrimination well into the 20th century, beyond the time they gained the right to vote in 1920. What we don't want to happen, though, is for the visitors to think that women's social protest movement began and ended with the defense of their own civil rights. That's not true at all. Women really in Virginia, even in the antebellum period, with their benevolent societies and so forth, were very active in social reform and humanitarian movements. And of course, the Seneca Falls Convention was held, and it was in the 1840s. Seneca Falls, New York. It was not a voting rights movement. It was an early movement to affirm the right that women had to the same full citizenship rights that white men had. It's a...
And it was white women who were doing the protesting.
Yes, exactly. So we can talk a little bit more about women's protest movements as we go along. You'll also want to look at the timeline for that. But women's protest movements that began in the 19th century really began to transform the civic landscape of America in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Women helped change the face of American society in their reform of women's labor, children's labor, other social movements that really were very important to giving a human face to the Industrial Revolution in this country. So, why don't you?
Well, I want you as docents to compare the excitement, the fierceness, the public protest, the women speaking as human beings to everyone else in this image in the 1970s with the one we just saw, the myth of women, domestic women, well-dressed, at home, imprisoned in home. This is the best contrast I know. And look how interested the policeman is here. Notice the gender of the policeman. We have here, and I don't know whether you can pan to it, earlier women's suffrage in Virginia, or this is the women's suffrage. This is a 1919 rally on the steps of Thomas Jefferson's Capitol, where women are engaged along with men. The speaker pictured here is a man to try to gain the vote. These two images show women acting in public and demanding their rights.
Right. And immediately after they gained their rights, they formed the Voting League, the Women's Voting League, to get out the vote and to promote other social issues. Women who are active in social movements in late 19th century Virginia and into the early 20th century, who were petitioning the state legislature, realized that their social protests and their social reform movements were going to go nowhere unless they gain the right to vote. So the gaining the right to vote was never just to individually empower women, but to continue to empower their social reform movements. It caused, every time we have major social change in our society, it creates a certain amount of unrest and phobia. And so, although this is not very visible here, we included a postcard of a man whose clothing is literally unraveling to represent the fear that the family was going to become unraveled if women were given the right to vote. And the family, of course, has always been the cornerstone of American society and the stability of the social system. So by the time we get to the Equal Rights Amendment agitation in the 1970s and 1980s, women were already there in the workforce. The majority of them had families at home, and the whole argument is turned around. The idea is that women were actually supporting the stability and well-being of the home by being able to earn better salaries.
By even being in public, by asserting themselves.
Yes.